Now, hello, good evening, everyone. I'm just watching you all trickle in. Welcome, everyone, to the sixth webinar in the Family Information Series. I hope everyone's having a nice evening. You're very welcome here this evening to our webinar on supporting parents to support their families where an adolescent has a mental health difficulty. I'm really delighted to welcome Noelle Meehan, systemic therapist in our Willow Grove Adolescent unit, to talk to this subject today. And I hope that you'll find it really beneficial and informative. Just a few notes about the webinar. It is recorded, so please feel free to just pace yourself during the webinar. Sometimes difficult emotions can come up, so do whatever you need to do just to mind yourself. If you need to take a break, need to pace yourself, do so in the knowledge that you know you can come back to it and know that the webinar will be recorded and available on the website in the coming days. We will hopefully have time for some questions, so if you want to pop that into the Q&A, we'll hopefully get to that at the end. But without further ado, I'll hand over to Noelle, and Noelle, I'll invite you to share your screen.
Okay.
With the presentation.
Thanks, Elaine. This is the scariest part for me. Yay, we did it.
Fantastic.
Okay, here we go. Hi, everyone. How are you? Just to kind of reiterate what Elaine said, I'm so glad you made it along tonight. I hope you get something, even a small nugget, out of what we're talking about tonight. And yeah, hopefully we'll have time for questions at the end. I am never, ever going to get used to talking to people that I can't see when I'm, doing conversations like this. So I suppose, as Elaine said, my name is Noelle, and I'm the systemic family therapist in Willow Grove Adolescent unit. I suppose I started my working career back in the 1990s, which makes me feel incredibly old, but I'll have to get over that, in residential childcare, and then began working in family centres. And then in 2005, I started to work in St. Patrick's Mental Health Service. I worked in St. Pat's, I worked in St. Ed's, and now I'm in Willow Grove. I suppose one of the things is I've met, as you can imagine, a lot of families over the years. And there are no two families the same, and there are no two teenagers the same. And I suppose I say that now at the beginning, because all of what I talk about today is general. It's difficult to talk about kind of individual cases. So it's kind of a generalization of how things are, some common themes that come up a lot in my work. And I think what can be difficult is that, what works for one family may not work for another family, and what works for one teenager may not work for a younger sibling. So it's just kind of remembering that when we're going through the presentation tonight. I think the other bit that I do have to add, that, one of the hardest jobs that I have that isn't on my CV, that doesn't have a job description, that doesn't have a get out clause, is that I'm a parent. I think it is one of the most difficult jobs in the world, and it gets little or no praise or acknowledgement. It doesn't come with a textbook. It doesn't come with, guidelines. We just kind of have to wing it. So I just kind of always name that with families when I begin. That it is something. Yeah, it's probably one of the hardest jobs in the world and doesn't get enough kind of credit. Okay, so let's see. Okay, so tonight the presentation is going to be divided into three parts. So when a young person is experiencing difficulties, or when a young person has a mental health issue, it impacts on everybody in the family. And likewise, what's going on in the family is going to impact on the young person. That doesn't have to be what we would consider major trauma. It can be moving house, it can be dad changing job, it can be mom changing job, it can be somebody going back to work, somebody leaving to go to college. Like just different transitions in a family can impact on a young person. And likewise, what's going on for the young person can impact on the family. I kind of often say to people that even though, the mental health issue kind of inhabits an individual, or it kind of manifests itself, if you like, in the individual, the other side of that is that it does actually occupy the entire family home. And many of the families that I work with, and to be honest, I've learned more from families than I have from any of the books or any of the workshops or that I've done over the years, is that it does kind of take over the entire family. And we'll talk about that, and I'll refer back to that a little bit more as we go on this evening. So because of that, we need to look at the various different parts of the whole. So obviously the family as a whole, and there's the young person who's struggling, and there's their siblings, if they have siblings, and then there's the response of parents, and what it's like for parents. And it's kind of, we need to look at all of that when we're helping the young person on the road to recovery. We don't live as an island, you know, and there's no point in kind of taking a young person out of their home, possibly admitting to hospital and working really hard to help them feel better about themselves or to help them address their mental health issues without kind of recognizing the impact that it has on families and the huge part that family plays in supporting the young person on their road to recovery. Okay, so the first bit is, you know, for the response of parents, and acknowledging with parents. I mean, I'm guessing, as I say, I can't see you, if I asked all of you to step out in the field and said, you know, if I met you guys 20 years ago, is this where you think you'd be on a Tuesday evening, you know, sitting to a talk about your young person or your son or daughter battling with mental health issues? This is not somewhere we ever expect to be. We expect the broken arms, we expect the broken legs, possibly trips to A&E, maybe an appendicitis, maybe tonsillitis, but we don't expect this. And it can be quite a shock when we find out that our young person are, you know, who we consider to be the most incredible person in the world, the most beautiful, the most brilliant, the most perfect, and they're thinking of harming themselves, or they're thinking of ending their life because life has become too hard, or they're looking in a mirror thinking that they're ugly or they're fat, and they almost starving themselves to try and feel better about themselves. It's really difficult to hear those things. And I also think it's really important to acknowledge that with you guys as parents. It is really difficult to hear our young people say that. And not only do we have to deal with the difficulty of hearing it, we're supposed to sit with it and help them express themselves and try not fall apart with our broken heart on the inside, and help them find the strength to kind of get themselves through it. I think the other part that's really difficult, and we need to acknowledge it, I think, with parents as well, is with you guys, is that there is no definites in mental health. And I think that's really, really hard. For the majority of physical illnesses, when you go to a doctor, you go to a consultant, you go to a specialist, you're given kind of guidelines of, if you do this, this, and this, then this will happen. And if you do this for 6 weeks, come back and review, and then we'll do this for 4 weeks, and, you know, everything will be okay. There is no definites in mental health, which is really difficult. I mean, even things as, you know, you try a medication and your child might be sensitive to it, and then you try another one. It could be that CBT works for one child and it doesn't work for another. You know, and that's, I think that's really difficult for parents. I also think it's difficult for you guys if you know, because we want answers. You know, as parents, our default position is that we need to fix this. There is something wrong with our child and we need to fix it. And I think it's a really difficult position to be in when the professionals are trying to say, look, we've got to sit with this for a minute. We've got to acknowledge and validate how awful they're feeling before we can begin to make them feel better, because that's part of making them feel better. But we don't have an answer. We don't have, this is what's going to work. And I think that can be really, really difficult for parents. I also think as parents, we go on autopilot. You know, if I had a tenner for every time a parent said to me, you know, if they're okay, I'll be okay. If I start to get upset now, I'll not stop. I would actually be living in Barbados if I had a tenner for every time parents said to me. And it's just a really, and there isn't a huge amount of space to kind of to talk about those feelings, and yet we're expected to kind of hold it together to mind our young people. And it's about kind of minding ourselves as well. And that can be with each other, you depend on each other. It can be extended family, it can be kind of more formal supports, but it's really important that we kind of seek that out. The other part that sometimes gets lost as well is that as parents, there is other stuff going on. We have other children who have to be at swimming at 6 o'clock, and we have other children who may have hospital appointments or opticians appointments or dental appointments. We have parents ourselves who might need looking after, and might take our time. We have jobs that we need to keep. And you know, they can be stressful. We don't know what's going on there. So there's a whole lot going on at the same time. And obviously, the primary concern for every single parent that I've ever met in all of my years over my work, their primary concern is helping their young person feel better. But it's just to acknowledge that there can be so much going on as well. And it's just to even to acknowledge that for yourselves and to just take a moment every now and again to say, oh my God, this is really, really tough. So the second piece then, I suppose that with parents is to remember that like how we respond to our young people is going to be influenced by how we are. And if we all think back to when we were growing, well, I can't see you, so I don't know what age bracket you are. And some of you might be similar in age to me, some of you might be younger, some of you might be older. But you know, what the different attitudes and beliefs that we grew up with are going to impact how we respond to our young people. So, you know, the things of, you know, like don't wash your dirty laundry in public. You know, in my family, we were told to get up and get on with it. You know, everybody has a bad day. We just need to push through. So these different kind of phrases that we hear growing up, they kind of stick with us. And it can be difficult if how we feel we want to respond and nurture our child kind of goes against what we believe, or kind of what we've been led to believe as we're growing up. And then what happens then is what can happen is the two parents can respond differently. So you might have a man saying, no, we need to encourage them. He needs to do this. We need to encourage him some more. And dad might be, no, look, he's really in bad form today. Let's just leave him for a little while and we'll come back to it later. So I kind of call that, as you know, there's the gentle hug and then there's the firm hand. And then there's kind of, okay, well, what do we do here? Do we negotiate a place in the middle? Or do we embrace both? And I suppose I would say embrace all three. Because there's times when the young person needs a bit of a push. Sometimes the young person doesn't thank me for saying that. They need a push. There's other times they need the kind of the cuddle and the nurturing and the, you know, yeah, this is awful. It's okay. Let's just flop here for the day and we'll be fine. And sometimes they need a bit in the middle. I think the dilemma for parents is figuring out when they need what. Because if a young person is in a place, pardon me, where they need a gentle hug and they're being encouraged and pushed, that's going to be very difficult for them. And likewise, if they're in a place where they need a little bit of encouragement to do something and they don't, they can become quite stuck. And that's a real dilemma for parents. What I say to a lot of parents, and I'll talk about it again later on in the presentation, is that you learn to know. You begin to get a gut feeling. Sometimes I think parents stop trusting their gut because they're so fearful of you know, making their young person feel worse. You know, parents that I've met have kind of been really, really worried about that and worried about tripping over themselves or saying something that will make their young person feel worse. But it's, you know, and that's the dilemma, trying to figure out what's needed in each moment. But there's young people have different needs and different types of support. So often I would have parents and one would be saying, I can't be doing all that talking now. I can't get into the emotional stuff, but I'm happy to go for a walk, go for a cycle. And the young person needs both. And it's quite normal. Like teenagers generally, in their teenage years, where else would they be? They generally begin to differentiate the needs that they get met from different parents. So like even in my own family, if you know the kids wanted to have a chat, they might come to me. If they needed help with their maths homework, they knew not to come anywhere near me, but to go to their dad. So, you know, teenagers begin to do that anyway. They begin to differentiate. This is where I get this need met. You know, dad's a soft touch. I'll get a tenner off him going out tonight. There's no point in asking man. You know, so it doesn't. It's not always the best that everybody responds in the same way. Like difference can be good. It's just figuring what's needed when. That's the kind, I suppose, the tricky part. I think the other part as well is if a parent themselves already has a mental health issue, I think that can be very difficult as well. And again, as I was saying earlier, I've learned more from the families that I've worked with than reading any book or going to any workshop or doing any courses. And in my experience of working with families, if a parent has a history of a mental health issue, the emotions that can come with that can be quite varying. They can come from kind of guilt to, oh my God, is it my fault? Is it something that I did? All the way up to being really, really empathic and being able to support a young person in a very different way because they feel they have a unique experience and kind of knowing what it's like to struggle with a mental health issue. And I suppose the bit for me is with young people, and I'll probably say this again and again through the presentation, it's really, really important that we stay curious. that we don't presume to know. It's a real Irish thing, isn't it? You know what I mean? You know what I mean? And it's really important that we don't go, yeah, I know exactly what you mean. We need to say, yeah, I understand, but help me understand a little bit differently. So when you say you're really feeling really flat, for me, that means like, I just can't get out of bed. What does it mean for you? Because it might mean for them, no, I can come down to the living room, but I can't go out with my friends. So it is about kind of not presuming to know when their language is quite vague. And I think sometimes when a parent has a mental health issue, what they have reflected back to me is sometimes when a young person is talking to them about how they're feeling, it really strikes a chord. And there's a huge helpfulness in being able to say, yeah, I get that. I remember there was a time when this was happening for me. And to not fall into the trap of, this is what helped me, so let's try it. Because what helped you and what helped a young person might not be the same. So it could be about saying, when this happened, this is what I did and it helped me. Would you like to try it? Or do you want to try something else? And then the other part, just that comes up obviously a lot with parents as well, is when parents don't live in the same house. I have to say, I can't see the audience. I'm not sure if people are here, but I am really struck by how parents can come together and meet me previously in a room, now on screen, to talk about their young person when their own difficulties were so intense that it ended up that they couldn't be married anymore, that they're not living in the house anymore, and that they can actually find a way to put that to one side to focus on the young person. I'm really struck by the strength of people to be able to do that. And I just think it gives an incredible message to their young person, that this is what we're doing, this is how much we care, this is how much we worry. So I think it's, it's a huge positive when parents are able to do that. They're not always able to do it, and so then there's different ways that we can work about that. But I am always struck by parent strength, I suppose, in being able to do that. I think what I would say when parents aren't living in the same house together, what's important is that there's almost like a handover. I can compare it to the nursing handover on the unit, that if your son is with you during the week and then going to your partner at weekends or your ex-partner at weekends, it's that there's a bit of a handover around, look, he was great on Wednesday, wasn't so good on Thursday, didn't make it into school today. Just so there's some kind of flow and some kind of continuity of care, so that you can begin to piece things together. Because again, later on, I'll be talking about figuring, when to push your child and when not to push your child. And beginning to learn to know the difference of when your child is not able to do something and just doesn't want to, because they're still teenagers after all. And one of the ways of doing that is trying to see a pattern in behavior or see maybe triggers. And if your child is living in two different settings, that handover is really important, because if your child is like a Briar on a Friday with you and then goes to the other house on a Saturday and is in good form with you on the Friday and then goes to your their dad's house or their mom's house on the Saturday, and they're in really bad form there. If there's a connection that can be made in the handover, that it just helps with the predictability and being able to kind of help yourselves and the young person begin to figure out what are the particular times or the particular events that are going to trigger me, are going to kind of make it kind of difficult for me. Oh, sorry, I skipped the wrong thing. Okay. So then I'm just going to briefly look at the impact on siblings before I talk about the adolescent, because I think this is a really important part as well, but we'll probably spend a little bit longer on the adolescent piece. So this is, in the unit and in the family centres where I worked before, I would always offer to meet the siblings as well, regardless of their age. Some parents would reflect back to me that they think some of their children are too young. Completely respect that, because as the parents, we know our kids better than anybody else. Sometimes it's about helping parents talk to their children. But the piece for me is if a child is living in a home where there's a mental health issue, they're picking up on something, and it can even just be good to kind of figure that out. So one of the first things that comes up for me a lot, particularly maybe with kind of older siblings, I don't necessarily mean older than the young person who's struggling, but kind of more sort of into teenage years rather than younger children, is that they worry about their mum and dad. They're worried about the toll of their mum and dad. And they'll say things like, I know mum and dad aren't sleeping. I know mum and dad are really worried. I think mum has lost weight. I think dad looks really pale. And I think one of the things, again, as parents, our default is to kind of reassure, and our default is to say, like, don't worry, we'll be grand. When parents, I often say, I mean, I'm laughing at this because I would do it myself. But it's like, you know, if I'm worried about my children going out at night time, I mean, they're both older now, they're not teenagers anymore, but about them going out, and they say to me, don't worry, I'm thinking, hello, of course I'm going to worry. You know, just because you're telling me don't worry doesn't mean I'm not going to. So we kind of have to practice what we preach a little bit with that one. And you know, so it's not about saying, look, don't worry, we'll be fine. It's about kind of acknowledging in an age appropriate way, look, yeah, this is really tough, and yes, we're really worried, but we're going to get through this. We're getting the appropriate help. Of course we're tired, of course we're worried, but we're getting the appropriate help, and we're going to be okay. Because if you're going, we're fine, the siblings have no yardstick to kind of measure when you are doing better. Because if this is fine, I'd hate to see it when you're struggling, kind of thing. And then also for the young people to be able to name it, it is really important that we're kind of honest in a very age appropriate way. The other piece that comes up, and this kind of links in with the kind of being worried about mum and dad and the toll it's taken on them, is that young people, siblings, can be quite reticent to express their own needs. And I suppose what I would often say is, you know, like if they come home from school and they've had a row with a little friend in school, and something that's really worrying them that they would normally talk to you about, and they become a little bit reticent to do that. And it's kind of like, I'd often say, it's like, I'm not going to complain about a paper cut if I'm talking to somebody who's broken their leg in 3 places. And yet my paper cut might be very important to me. And it's about having the space to be able to talk about that. And that's, you know, again, it links into the next bit, which is about the mental health issue taking over. It's finding time that they can do that. So when I talk about the mental health issue taking over, sometimes it can dictate the kind of the entire family routine. It can dictate what's done and what's not done. If, you know, if Mary blogs, I don't want to use anybody's name, you know, if your daughter's having a particularly difficult day and the plan was to go out for a family meal and now she's struggling, the meal might get cancelled. If part of the family, if you have a child who's struggling with an eating disorder, and part of the tradition is to go for a really long walk on a Saturday morning, and for a little while that's not possible, there can be sometimes what word do they use? Almost like a shadow in the house, like a sense of a heaviness, because of the worry and because of the concern. And when somebody is depressed or anxious or struggling with an eating disorder or struggling with difficult thoughts, that heaviness can kind of spread. And it's about trying to break that in small ways, and finding time. So it's even about things like, if you're dropping them to swimming, getting a hot chocolate on the way home and talking with the hot chocolate in the car. Like, it can be very small moments and not missing a chance where they have the kind of the chance to talk to you. The other thing that comes up as well is with the whole kind of the mental health issue taking over is that, but I suppose this comes with younger siblings more, it's kind of, they get away with everything. They're allowed to stay in bed all day, and they don't have to go to school, and they don't have to empty the dishwasher, and they don't, you know, because there isn't a full understanding on their part about, you know, how their sibling is doing. The other bit as well then is how it also can dictate is there can be a concern, and the concern comes up from parents a lot. And again, it's about being very open, being very straight with the children, is that their worry is that younger children will either mimic the behavior, or younger children will get worried that they will become unwell as well. That it's kind of, well, it's happened to her, so it's happened to me, or it's happened to my big brother, so it's going to happen to me. And that's where the kind of being very open and being very honest and being very straight in an age appropriate way with children is really important. They can also be quite nervous about discharge. I know for younger people, if there's somebody in the family with an eating disorder and they're coming home from hospital, there can be a fear, oh, we're just going to go back to all the arguments that we've had at meal times, or, you know, mum and dad are going to be shouting at her all the time. And, you know, so there can be a worry that things will go back to the way they were before. And that's actually, in my experience, I find for both parents, for yourselves and for young people, is that's gotten much bigger with COVID. Because previously, when young people were admitted to the unit, they'd have days at home, they'd have weekends at home, and you'd be able to kind of see the progress yourself. Whereas now you're kind of, you know, parents are ringing in to get progress. They're trying to guess in a 45-minute visit how their young person is doing. So it can certainly up the concerns around discharge. So it is about being really straight, but I can't stress as well, like using appropriate language. You know, so sometimes when people are, if it is an eating disorder, sometimes when people are feeling very sad, they're not able to eat. It makes them feel a bit sick and they're not able to eat. And then as the young person gets older, they can get more information, rather than maybe suggesting that they're gone away for a few days, or they're going to stay with the granny in Dublin, or, you know, being kind of very straight about the illness in an age-appropriate way is really important for the siblings. Okay, so responding to the adolescent, sorry, I'm just going to take a drink of water, I'll be really quick. Okay, so validation, I'm sure if you guys have, obviously, if you have experience of a young person with a mental health issue, you'll be very familiar with the word validation. I think it's really important. It's a word I think that probably gets thrown around a little bit, but it is really important. And I think finding the balance in it is important as well. That's what I mean by not feeding into. So when a young person is struggling, again, as parents, I think our default is to try and make them feel better. So if they're saying, like, you know, I can't get out of bed, we can kind of go, well, look, try this, maybe you'll feel better. Or, you know, I really can't get into school today. We'll get up and get into your uniform and see if that makes you feel a bit better. And then come downstairs and have a bit. So we're always trying to make it better and always trying to fix it. And I think if we can slip in a little sentence about, God, I'm really sorry you're feeling that way. It must be awful. Have you been feeling that way long? Did it start this morning? Have you been like that since last night? Just less than 3 minutes even of just going, oh my God, that's awful. In my experience, when we can do that, the young people respond better then to the challenge or the suggestion of distraction. Whereas if you go straight to the distraction of, look, maybe if you go for a walk, you'll feel better, they feel kind of dismissed, or they feel like you don't understand how I feel. If going for a walk was going to make me feel better, I'd have tried it. You know, and you can kind of get, I suppose, the bit of teenage attitude coming out as well. Whereas if the time is taken to validate it, I think they're more willing to kind of go with the challenge or the suggestion of distraction or whatever. And that moment is really helpful. It's like, I kind of liken it to, you know, when children are very small, they always did it to me when I was on the phone, and they come over and they're patting your leg and they're going, mommy, 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 mommy. And if you ignore them and try and pretend they're not there, they will pat harder and they will call louder. Whereas if you take a minute and just say, what is it? There's your coloring book. There's your crayons. You'll get back to your phone call and they will be fine. So just acknowledging it stops it building. Whereas if it's kind of not acknowledged and just immediately other suggestions are thrown in, it will get louder. The feeling will get louder because it hasn't been acknowledged. So that, you know, either the dark thoughts or the negative thoughts or just the depression or the anxiety, if it's not validated before we do that, it will, the anxiety or the depression or the negative thoughts, in my experience with young people, it will just get louder. The other side of that is, if we validate the awfulness too much, we can nearly feed into it. And then there's no space to kind of comment on the good bits that are happening. I'll talk about that a little bit more as well when I'm talking about kind of miscommunication and stuff. But if we go, oh my God, that's awful, and we stay with the, oh my God, that's awful, and we stay with the, oh my God, that's awful, and there's no kind of, but you remember yesterday when you did this, you felt a bit better, will we try it again? If we just concentrate on the awfulness all the time, it becomes incredibly powerful, and it's much, much harder to kind of get it out of the house, for want of a better way to put it. It's much harder to kind of introduce the positives. And yet, if we go the other way and we acknowledge the positives too much, young people will work very hard to remind us that we're not doing that well. So it's striking that balance and figuring out, okay, I need to do the validating and then I need to do the challenging. And if I do the challenging first, it may not work. And it's, again, this is all a learning curve, and none of us get it right all the time. But it is a learning, and it's about kind of working our way through that with the young person and ourselves. So it is just about that kind of acknowledging but not nurturing it. As well as that, just on the validating piece, when we're talking about kind of introducing that challenge for young people, and we say, try this, and they're kind of going, no. Young people, I'm sure you've all experienced this, they find it difficult to differentiate between not being understood and not being agreed with. So I understand how awful you're feeling, but I don't agree that staying in bed all day is going to make you feel better. Whereas if we're encouraging them to come out of the bed, we get, you don't understand, you don't understand. And I do understand how awful it is. I do understand it's like asking me to climb Mount Everest at the moment, But I don't agree that staying in bed all day is going to make you feel better. I think coming out for a walk will help a little bit. And that is a struggle for young people, that, you know, differentiating between being understood and being agreed with. So yeah, so it's just kind of about remembering that when we're doing the validating and not feeding into and trying kind of encouraging them to do things differently. The other thing that's really common, this comes up a lot for everyone, is how can we tell the difference between teenage behavior and behavior that's indicative of distress? Like what is, you know, a teenager moodiness and a teenager that's depressed? What's a teenager who's looking in the mirror going, well, does my bum look big in this? And what's a teenager that's on the verge of developing an eating disorder? And this, you know, this is a really, really hard call. And it's something that I would say 99% of parents that I meet beat themselves up about. Regardless of the mental health issue, whether it's an eating disorder, whether it's anxiety, whether it's depression, whether they have suicidal thoughts, whether they've, you know, engaged in deliberate self-harm. It's why did I not see this? Why did I not see that? And the majority of mental health issues, particularly eating disorders, are so secretive and so private that it's really difficult to see. And I suppose what I would encourage parents to do is we can't use hindsight as a stick to beat ourselves with. That is not helpful, but we absolutely need to use hindsight as a learning curve. So we can look back and go, like, there's a learning in the looking back. It's just important not to wallow in the looking back. Because if we look back, we can say, oh my gosh, do you remember the time she did that? That was actually happening. So then moving forward, if there's a time where she's spending too much time in her room or she's changing 10 times before she leaves the house, we need to kind of watch that. Or if there's a time when he's listening to this music and he's not having his friends over, maybe that's something that it isn't just that he's having a mood or he had a row with his friends. Maybe that's something that we need to be a little bit more mindful of. But it's a really difficult call. I suppose again, it's difficult. It's even a, you know, when I'm asked, it's a difficult question to answer. I suppose because there's always the muddy bits in the middle. There's things that are very clear, like if the behavior is debilitating, that's obviously not teenage behavior. It's something a little bit more. But there's always those bits that are kind of right on the line, and you're not sure which is which. And you kind of, parents, like as parents, we don't want to make too much of something. We don't want to make an issue that isn't there, but neither do we want to ignore the stress. And I think it is about figuring. It's like when you have a new baby and nobody can explain it, but we begin to know the different cries. We know the cry when they're hungry. We know the cry when they need feeding. We know the cry when they have a dirty nappy. It's similar. There will be things that you will notice about your young person's behavior that will suggest, oh, right, okay, he's really struggling here. Or, do you know what? He's just being moody now. And we need to, you know, get him in the car and get him into school or whatever. You will begin to see the difference. And I think part of living with a young person with a mental health issue, as parents, we stop trusting our gut because we're second guessing everything. So they speak smartly to us and we want to go, don't speak to me like that. And we say, oh, no, I won't say that to him now because he's probably in a bad place. And really what it's about saying, look, I know you're upset, but it's not okay to speak to me that way. So it's back to acknowledging or validating the feeling, but then saying, but it's really not okay to speak to me that way. Or it's not okay to throw your younger brother's toys across the room just because he's making too much noise, do you know? And I think it's also for young people, like all of the young people want to be well, but there's a difference between being well and getting well. And getting well is really, really hard work. And teenagers don't always like hard work. They would love to just kind of maybe wake up, as we would love them, to kind of wake up in the morning and be okay. And it's finding the way to kind of keep them on that journey, but also mind the balance of there is normal, ordinary, everyday teenager behavior in here as well. And it's funny, a long time ago in a different setting, I remember a family coming in and the mother was blooming because her 16-year-old had gone drinking with his friends. And I was kind of okay. And she said it was just so normal. I can't remember the time I had normal, that when I went out with my friends, I was able to give out about my son the way they give out about theirs. Like, he doesn't come home on time, because her son had been so depressed for such a long time that he hadn't been going out and he hadn't been seeing friends and he hadn't been to school. So all of the other parents were giving out about this, and this mum in particular was practically celebrating the fact that her son had broke the rules. So it is about kind of acknowledging that there is teenage behavior in there, but also managing the difference and figuring out what the difference is. And that's a journey that doesn't happen overnight. It's a learning curve. I can't tell you the answer. I think, one of the things, that it'll probably come up again as well, with like, there is a collaboration in working with young people to get them well. I mean, as professionals and people who have been working in the field for a while, we have a certain level of expertise, can't even say the word. But as parents, you're the experts on your children, and it's the two coming together that give our children the best outcome. So I can't answer the question as how do you know the difference between teenage behavior and behavior indicative of distress. I think there's a difference between when children are unwilling to do something and unable to do something. And sometimes you can get that, like that, they don't want to get up to school, go into school, but they're happy to meet their friends, or they come down and do something they enjoy doing. And that can be a little bit indicative of, that's a time when they could do with a little bit of a push to do something rather than be left in the bed or whatever. But it is all a learning curve. It's a really hard call. It's just really important that you don't beat yourselves up about it, and that every instance is a learning for the next time. Okay. And that piece about learning to trust your gut again, it's a really scary one, but it's really important that begins to happen as well. Okay. Then as well, balancing expectations with wellness and the importance of pacing and recovery. That's quite an important one as well. And it's as bad to have expectations that are too low as it is to have expectations that are too high. So just, a very simple example of, balancing expectations with wellness is, if I woke up this morning and I felt fine and I came into work. If I woke up in the morning with a bit of a headache, I'd come into work, but things would probably take me longer to do. Especially the paperwork, probably take me longer to do. If I wake up with a migraine, I'm gone to bed and there is no point in me coming into work. So what I expect of myself has to be measured with how well that I'm doing. We need to do that with our young people, and we also need to do that with ourselves. If you come in and you've had a horrendous day in work, you had to collect 2 kids on the way home from work, and then you arrive home and your young person is struggling, you need to kind of balance what you expect of yourself as well as your young person in that road to recovery. That might be the time where it's, look, I know you're really struggling. Would it be okay if we watched a movie instead of having a big chat, because I'm not in a good place today? And I think as parents, we need to be able to give ourselves that permission. And I think we need to give our adolescents enough credit that they may be able to hear that. That might also be a bit of a journey as well, but it's just really important that we do that. I think the danger in, when young people are in a spot where they're struggling with their mental health, and so everyday things can feel like a bit of a hurdle or a bit of an ordeal. So if we expect too much of them, they will shoot back into, like an elastic band, they'll shoot back into their stuckness. But if we expect too little of them, they'll never get out of it. And it's about trying to find the balance with that. And as parents, you know your children best. And it's okay that if you push a little bit hard and recognize it, that you pull back. And if you start and the expectations are a little bit low, it's okay to kind of build on them. Because again, it's a learning curve and we are not always going to get it right. And it's about figuring out how to do that. And again, just not beating ourselves up when we don't get it right all the time. The other bit, and then the final point on this slide, that the seesaw of trust and concern and the young person's responsibility within that. This, I suppose, comes up in conversations a lot with parents I work with, especially when the young people are close to discharge. But it's that kind of, it's trusting that the young person will be okay, and also concerned that they won't be. And I suppose the more that you trust the young person, the less your concern, and therefore the more kind of independence or freedom that you give them. So if you have a young person and maybe they've engaged in deliberate self-harm, or they've had, suicidal thoughts without ever acting on it, that's hugely concerning for a parent. And in my experience, parents who are concerned when making decisions about things like, can I go out with my friends? Can I go to Johnny's house? Can I go into town with Mary? They will err on the side of caution. And we'll talk about it again in another slide, but sometimes young people perceive concern as control. And it's important in those conversations to recognize that the young person also has a responsibility in easing your concern. So in being able to be open and honest about, I'm having an okay day today, or I'm having an absolutely awful day today, or, you know, that my thoughts are really difficult today, or yeah, I have bad thoughts today, but I'm doing okay. That kind of open conversation, and again, we'll talk about that in another slide. The more that you can trust that your young person will be honest with you about how they're feeling, whether it's a verbal communication or non-verbal communication, the more you can trust that, the easier it is to manage the concern, because you can pitch your concern to how well your young person is doing. If there's issues there, and if the young person is struggling to talk about how they're feeling, or is trying to hide it from you, the concern will escalate, because you're always going to err on the side of caution. And those conversations can be very helpful to have with young people and parents, or yourselves with the young person, to say, like, we want to know your opinions, we want to include your views in our decisions, but if you're not giving them to us, then we have to make the decision, and we're not always going to get it right, because our job and our priority is to keep you safe and to keep you well. And so we're not going to do anything that puts you in danger, or that puts you at risk. So you have a part to play in this, in that kind of open communication piece. It's not an easy conversation to have, but it is worthwhile. Because there is that piece where young people want to be left alone, they want time on their own in the room, they want to be able to go out with friends. And if they're talking about self-harming or having thoughts of self-harm on a Thursday evening, and then they want to go out on a Friday, that's going to be really concerning for parents. So then there needs to be some kind of negotiation around, okay, well, yeah, you can go out, but I need you to phone me every half hour, or I'm going to text you every half hour, or you can go down to the local field, but you're not going into town. You know, with friends, and I think we all know, I would have had, I think most parents do, there are certain friends that we would rather our children be with than others, for different reasons. So there's a whole plethora, if you like, of things to take into account. And the more honest the young person is with you, and the more that you can trust that, the more that you will trust them, the concern will ease, and they will get the freedom and the independence that they're looking for. But it's a two-way stream, and young people can kind of struggle to understand that piece sometimes. I think they think, I told them I was fine, so they should understand it. And then other young people get it. It's very different for different young people. Okay. Yeah, this miscommunication. Sometimes, and I think as parents, we really need to remember this, the message that leaves us is not always the message that arrives at our adolescent. I mean, that's an example, just what I was talking about there is an example of that, is that where, you know, we can be very concerned about something, and our concern makes us behave a certain way, and then our young person feels like they're controlled. It's the same with encouragement. If we're encouraging our young people to do something, they'll come back and say, you're pushing me to do this, you're pushing me to do that, you're expecting too much, you don't think I'm doing enough. There's lots of things, you know, we can say to our young people, you're doing great, you're doing really, really well, and they think I'm better. Pardon me. And as I said before, if a young person thinks that their parents think they're doing better, sometimes they work really hard to remind them that they're really not doing great. For some parents, they say, I know how you feel. You know, I was, I don't know, on sick leave from work or something, and when I went back, it was really difficult. The adolescent can sometimes experience that as being really minimized. You know, if they think going back to work is the same, for me, going back to all of my friends and school that I hate and all this kind of stuff, they can feel quite minimized by that. The other piece as well, and God, I did it so much myself. When we say to our young people, especially with around school return, if we're saying to them, listen, we don't expect A's, we just expect you to do your best. If you're saying that to a young person whose previous best was I'm showing my age here, what are they now, H1s or whatever. If you're saying that to a young person whose previous best was H1s and A's, that's a lot of pressure to expect them to do their best. So again, it's a phrase, we all use it, just do your best. I don't mind how well you do as long as you do your best. But if there's a history of doing really, really well, that's kind of a pressure. So it's about kind of having a conversation. It's back to the expectations that, you know, we don't expect that when you were well and you didn't have mental health difficulties and you weren't struggling, that you were getting these. We don't expect that you would get the same. So if you're a marathon runner and you run 26K in, I don't know, 3 hours, is that fast or whatever? Now that you've had a broken leg and you've only been training for a week, we don't expect that you would run that in 3 hours. We might expect that you would run half that. So again, it's kind of being quite explicit and naming those kind of expectations. And it's really hard. There was a young woman I worked with, gosh, it's a long time ago now. She was in her early 20s, and I'll never forget it though. It was a really good example of this. She had very long hair, and she came into me one day and she got her hair cut. So obviously I said, "Oh my goodness, your hair is lovely." And she said, "Yeah, everybody in the office commented on it. They all thought it was really nice." And I said, "That was good," but she kind of didn't look like it was good. And she said, "I can't believe nobody told me they didn't like it long." So everybody had told her hair was lovely, complimenting her, but what she heard was, "They didn't like my hair long. I've been going around with long hair for years and nobody liked it." So now that's probably a very extreme example, but we just need to be mindful of that. The other thing that we can do as parents as well is we can say things like, "God, you're the image of so-and-so when you do that. Your image of your dad, you're the image of your granddad, and if there is a part of that other person that the young person doesn't like, that can connect with them. And it's jeepers. It's not about watching what you say 24/7, because that would drive you doolally, but it is about kind of just watching their face. You know, when we say things, just watching their face, and there'll be something in their expression that will let you know that you've said something and they've heard it in a way that you don't intend. I think that can also be quite common with young people battling with eating disorders. If they have very anorectic thinking, or if the anorectic voice is still very strong with them, and you know, you'd say to a young person, you know, "You look very well today," like your hair is shiny, or "You look well today." The voice would be telling them she thinks you look fat. So it's just about kind of being aware that they may be interpreting things differently. And it's just to be aware of it and be explicit and kind of naming it with them. Okay. The other piece that comes up as well, which is kind of the flip side, is if parents get upset when the young person is talking to them, the young person would often say to me, like, "I don't want to talk to them anymore because it makes them upset." And what's really important for a young person is to begin to not equate being upset with not being able to help. You know, like when our young people are telling us something funny, we laugh. When they're telling us something that has annoyed them, we might get angry on their behalf. And if they're telling us something heartbreaking, we get sad. And we might get a little bit upset, but it doesn't mean that we're not able to help them and support them. I think it's a natural reaction when your pride and joy is telling you that life is just too hard, or "I feel ugly and I feel awful." And, you know, it's a natural reaction to feel sad and to feel upset. And it's helping the young person understand that that doesn't equate with you not being able to support them. And it's kind of, you know, giving them, you know, that message as well. We sometimes do have to get creative in learning to communicate in new ways. You know, in general, sometimes in this country, I suppose, there are kind of taboo things to talk about. And young people might find it very difficult to talk about suicidal thoughts or thoughts of self-harm, or feeling very badly about themselves. And then we kind of just expect them to suddenly start. And I think what's important with parents and young people is to find ways of communicating differently. And initially, you know, with the young person, it's important to know how they're feeling. As parents, it's important to know how they're feeling, because then you can pitch the level of how do we mind them? How much do we have to do to keep them safe today? Or how do we mind them? And then you can work on why are you feeling that way? But acknowledging and validating how they're feeling can kind of help you get to the why of it. And it can be simple things. It can be music they listen to. It can be a t-shirt that they wear. It can be a scale of 1 to 10. It can be that the thoughts, you know, are they in the back of your head? Are they in front of your head, middle of your head? Where are the thoughts? And that you know by where they are, how strong they are. It can be about giving something a name. So I'm going to call my anxiety Fred. And then, well, where's Fred today? Is he in the garage? Is he in the house? Is he sitting beside you? You know, when you're making decisions, is it Fred making the decisions or is it you? So it's kind of, can even kind of have a little bit of fun with that, and then build up to the open communication. But it is really important to try and get there, and really important to name the hairy elephant in the room. And I think for parents and young people alike, it can be very difficult to say suicide. It can be very difficult to say, are you having suicidal thoughts? And I suppose in sessions when I'm talking with young people and parents, and it's things that you can do yourself with your child, is talking to them about, what do you call the thoughts? Do you call them dark thoughts? Do you call them negative thoughts? Do you call them suicidal thoughts? Do you call them horrible thoughts? Pardon me. And then use their language. It's really important that we use their language, because that helps. If we're using their language, it's giving them the message that we're really hearing what they're saying. And it also makes it a little bit more comfortable for them to talk about it. And then the other piece that we really need to do, we really need to try and do, is we need to reintroduce some fun. It cannot be about a mental health difficulty all of the time. It needs to be about having a crack with family again, having fun dinners, having fun walks, having fun times together, and not having the mental health issue take over the entire household and take over conversations and things that are done. It's about not allowing it to have that power, so that it doesn't all become about the mental health issue, that there is more. This is just a part of our young person. There is so much more to them. And fingers crossed, this is a phase that will, this is something that will pass them. It will get smaller for them. And it's just about remembering that there is so much more to them. I'm quite conscious of time, so I'm just going to fly through this bit. And then in case you guys have any questions. So just, these are common areas of concern that come out, Elaine. These are common areas of concern that come up a lot. I'll just fly through these really quickly, because I suppose dealing with them is kind of similar. So social media and phone usage, and kind of managing that when a young person has a mental health issue. COVID kind of hasn't helped with this, because I know with COVID, young people kind of maintained lifelines with social media and phone usage and would have been completely isolated without it. But it is about looking at, like, what's it for? Are they using social media to look at music and to look at funny TikToks, and does it help them relax? Or are they using social media to do calorie counting, or to look up kind of more darker sites, or sites that talk about kind of self-harm? Because there is pros and cons to that. And it's about having conversations with our young people about them being open about what they're looking at and them struggling with it. And being able to say to them, listen, we need to mind you. This is too much responsibility for you at this age. We need to mind you. And absolutely, you have the right to have your phone. We also need to be responsible enough to manage it. And we need to kind of balance those two things. Peer relationships is the same. I think we talked about that before. I mentioned that briefly before. There's such an important part to the young person, and there's pros and cons. There are some friends that if they want to go out with, we'd be going, oh, please no. And there's other friends that are going out and we'd be delighted. We think, yeah, no, they're great. They're really good people to be around. I think we need to really monitor that. If they're with people that we're worried about, it is about kind of having ideas about when they will check in and when they won't check in. It's keeping an eye, is their mood different when they come back? And then beginning the thing of, you seem a bit flatter since you came in. Are you worried about X? And kind of put it on the other person before. Are you not okay? Because they might get defensive and say, gosh, if I tell them I'm not okay now, they're not going to let me go out with this person again. So it's just, and it's back to that seesaw of trust and concern and managing that. Time alone in their room is needed. Young people need that little bit of space. It's about making it safe, and that's about possibly negotiating. Like, yeah, you can go to your room, but the door's open. You go to the room, but we check in every 20 minutes or every half hour or whatever. Or if you're in a really bad place, you don't have time alone in your room, you can have a time alone in another room downstairs, but it's closer to where everybody else is. That's kind of something that's negotiated. The returning to school, that's back to, and returning to normal living, that's back to kind of expectations. And balancing the expectation with how well they are. I think school needs to be seen in the context of a return to normal living. There's a social side to school as well as an academic side to school. I think young people can fall into thinking mum and dad, all they want to do is get them back to school. And that's not really it. I think parents sometimes do see the bigger picture of that, where, the value in the social and the routine of it. I think, and I think it's about staying curious. Is there something going on that's making school difficult? Is there an anxiety developing, and that's what's making school difficult? Are they, refusing to go to school because they're anxious about how they look, because they've become anxious in social situations? So being curious about why they don't want to go to school or why they're struggling with it. And when you get to the why, then it's kind of, I suppose, easier to kind of address the concerns, and back to kind of not presuming to know why they're not going to school. And then the last bit then is just managing the difference between secrecy and privacy. And for me, that's the piece around young people would often say, who will I tell? I want to tell my friends, and mom and dad might be, oh God, don't tell everybody, you'll be riddled with questions, or tell this person, but don't tell that person. And that's a conversation with the young person and their parents. there is an element of people having to know to get support. And it's about balancing that with the young person having kind of ownership over their life and over their story. And it's, you know, their story to tell and who they tell. But the conversation is around, you know, you don't have to tell everybody everything, and you don't have to tell nobody nothing. It is about, you know, well, I'll tell my best friend this, I'll tell my granny this, I'll tell my aunt that, I'll tell granddad that, I'll tell my siblings this. And it's kind of negotiating that. And I think parents are really best placed. You guys as parents are really best placed to have this conversation, because you know the people that they're talking about. You know that, yeah, this is a good person to tell, and you can encourage that. So yeah, so they're just common areas of concern. So I just want to say, you guys showed up this evening. So thank you. And your children are already lucky to have you as parents, because you're here and you're looking for the information and you're looking for the guidance, which is half the battle. And you got this. You've got to remember that. So thanks a million, guys.
Thank you so much, Noelle. That was fantastic. I really appreciate you taking the time this evening to talk to us. And there's no questions actually within the Q&A. I've arranged on the function, but actually we don't have that function on the webinar. So if that person could perhaps pop their question in the Q&A box, and hopefully the webinar won't cut off within that time. I think it's really obviously, you know, Noelle, you've touched on how much, you know, it can affect all areas of the family, and it's like an octopus that gets in there.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. It's hard minding everybody.
Yeah, absolutely. Trying to keep all those things.
And find time for yourself to keep yourself recharged to be able to mind everybody. Yeah.
Yeah, of course. And to validate your own feelings so that you can validate
absolutely
around you. So again, there's no questions coming through there. So if anybody does have any questions and they want to, you know, maybe obviously we can't comment on specific cases, but if you want to put them through to the support and information line email that's available on our website, please feel free to do so. And yeah, and just some thanks in there in the comments box. So thank you all for joining tonight. If there's any service users or ex-service users currently with us tonight, please be reminded that we have a supporters and service user council currently operating within in the hospital, and we're always looking for new members to service development and get active. So please be aware that that is available, and we are looking for new people to join, and the details are available on the carers section of the website. But again, thank you all for coming. Thank you, Noelle, for a fantastic webinar, and stay safe and have a good evening.
Okay, thanks guys. Thanks, Elaine. Take care, everyone. Bye.